And yeah, so we're going to talk about flow triggers and how do you unlock the potential of automation. So I know it's a bit cheesy. I think we're going to talk a lot more about flow triggers, trigger explorers, flow orchestration, different type of flow triggers and so on over here. And also we'll talk about some of the best practices, what I think we could follow, and also it could be like a conversation where we take in from the best practices perspective. If you guys have any tips and tricks as well, we'll hear you out. So, right. So just a little bit about myself. Ashwin, Kumar, Srinivasan. I work for Capgemini as a lead tech consultant. Been 12 years since I started in Salesforce. Started as a developer, did a lot of product development and then consultancy. So while I was doing product development, that's when flows became a big interest, where we started creating a lot of generic flows with generic Lightning components, mixing flows and Lightning components. So building something more generic across for people to use in a managed package. So that's my passion towards flows though. So yeah, 20 times certified. I also was an alumni Lightning champion though. So I think it was called as platform champion at that point. So again, most of it was due to this interest in flow and LWC components though. So yeah. I do a lot of university talks as well, career mentoring, and stuff around university where I help out technical and computer science people though. So. Right, so this is our agenda for the day. As I mentioned, we'll dig into slight bits and pieces of the basics. So we'll see what sort of components we have, what sort of actions we have, what are the elements we have, and things like that. On a high level, and then we'll touch base upon the different types of trigger flows, so the record ones, the scheduled triggers. We'll also fairly see about the orchestration, trigger explorer, also the platform event triggered flows. So anything which is related to the triggered flows though, yeah. And at the end, post the demo, we'll sort of have few slides to compare some sort of performances between flows to Apex, before flows or after flows to the Apex triggers and so on. This is more of to understand why we should go with lot with flow and when not to go with flow though. So we'll do some sort of scenarios as well, when to go with flow or when do we talk to the developers to say like go and write me some Apex, or ChatGPT to go and write some Apex though. So yeah. Right, and best practices and tips, I think probably everybody is hearing most of it every day from the gatekeepers, from the person who's doing the release management. So we're going to probably reiterate the same thing, maybe one or two new additional, hopefully helpful ones as well on that. But yeah, as I said, on the topic of best practices and tips, it's more of an open question to the audience as well. If you have any other suggestions and any other best practices, feel free to throw them out too. Right, so flow triggers, I don't know, I think it's sort of a definition which comes out in the web quite a lot though, but what we're going to do is anything which could trigger a flow, yeah? So there are different items which could trigger a flow. We're going to have a record-based trigger, so you can have, yeah, so it's on the screen. So yeah, you can have a time-based trigger though, so it's more like schedule time where you can say every Sunday or every day or at 12 o'clock, go and do some logic, yeah? So that's triggered by time. Then we have the record triggered flow. So the record trigger flow will be like creation of records, or when you change any values in the record, or when you update the record, or whatever it is, right? So anything which happen on that record per se, a flow will be triggered. So that is record trigger flow. We'll be talking a lot about record trigger flows because the the trigger explorer involves with the record trigger flow. How do we maintain the trigger explorer? How do we have an aligned way of working in using the record trigger flow though? In the record trigger flow, we also will touch base upon synchronous and asynchronous. I don't know how many of you are admins here. Could I do a shout out? Functionals, admins, any developers here? Perfect. So more admins and some developers across there. So I think a lot of you would have heard about the synchronous and asynchronous processes, but we'll talk about little examples of when you should use something which is happening right then and there as a synchronous, or when we could say like go off and do something. We are not worried about the result right now. We could handle the result later. That is more of asynchronous. So we'll talk about that as well. And as I mentioned, platform events. and in the audience, again, shout out, how many of you have worked with platform events over here? Right, okay. Very few. So there's not much we're going to talk about in the platform events, though, but it's more of a communication pattern, though. So if platform events is nothing but where you can throw an event saying, like, you can throw a message saying, like, yes, I've created an account. Do an API call, do whatever you want to, but there is this message. Anybody who's listening to that message could do any processing, basically. So it's not directly connected, so it's more like you send a message, anybody who's listening to that message could do whatever they would want to for that message, though. So similarly, Flow could listen to this platform events as well. So we're going to see how, when a Flow listens to platform event, what we should do and how do we create a Flow. But let's not dig deep into this because, again, this could get into its own session per se, though. So yeah. Right, so record trigger flows, as I said initially. Right. So we have, I think most of you have seen the screen. As soon as you go into your, click a new flow, you'll get an option to pick different varieties of flows, so basically a record trigger flow or a platform event flow or a schedule flow or whatever it is. So when you click record trigger flow, you will get this start page, yeah? So where the key element is to use the, have an object for it, basically. So unless there is an object which is created or updated, you can't work with it. So example, if you have an account and if you have an account getting created, so you have options with that, right? So in the configure trigger, you have options where you say, like, yes, you want to create or you want to update, you want to use it for both create and update, or you want to use it for the delete option as well, though. So so based upon your requirements, if you think a process should happen only when an account is created, go with the created one. If you think the process should happen when the account is updated, as well as created and updated, pick your choice, though, from that. Right. Okay. So the entry criteria, I'll talk about it a little bit more on the best practices as well. This is quite important. I think a lot of us, when we create flows, we don't create an entry criteria when we create the flow itself. We have, I don't know if you guys have used the decision elements. I think anybody who's been used to the flow, a lot of people will use a decision element inside a flow to say, yes, if an account is active, do so and so. If a case is of medium priority, do so and so. So you will have decision elements inside the flow, but to have the filtering out when the flow to be triggered is pretty critical on the performance basics, though. But we'll touch base more on the demo part of it and also on the performance best practices, though. So really important thing to note about. So and then the last option we have is, this is where we need to pick when this flow to run. So there are multiple options. I think for the developers, the minimal audience we have, they would have heard about before triggers and after triggers. In flows, they call it fast field updates and action-related, and then action and related record updates, though. So basically, if you're updating the same record, so if an account is created with status as active, and you want to set an account number as something, basically you're actually, based upon an account field, you're setting another account field. So you're updating the same record. So you're updating the same record before it hits the database. So that's something where you call it as before trigger in the trigger perspective, and in flows they call it as fast field updates. They are, from a performance wise, they are very, very good. They are almost 8 times faster than the process builders, or the workflows or any other older automation technologies you would have used. So anything which, if you're updating the same record, definitely go with the flow option and try and do the fast field updates over here. So yes, and also we have this actions and related records. That's more of an after save. Once the data is committed to the database, what we're going to do over there. So sending email actions could be one of it. Maybe I might do an asynchronous process for that, or again, it's a choice you could pick. Or creating an account, or so creating a contact when the account is getting created. Maybe if you have a certain criteria, you want to create a equivalent contact, because I don't know if anybody has worked with like orders and pricing and stuff. You'll have an account structure where if you're working with energy utilities and stuff, mostly if it's a customer you're working directly with, the account and the contact will be the same. You might use an automation where you don't need to create the contact separately. Whenever you create an account, you just could create a contact. So, or any other related records based upon the requirement. So if a case has a high priority, you want to create an escalation out of it, or you want to do something because of the cases, you want to send an email out, again, basically go with this option though. The last one is include asynchronous part. We'll touch base on the slide where I have the asynchronous over here. But again, more important thing to note here is do check it. If you think that you need an asynchronous part for that particular flow itself, do check it when you create it. I couldn't find an option yet to go back and update to have an asynchronous part easily though. So maybe if anybody have tried it, I was not able to get my asynchronous path signed up after I've activated the flow. Even if I deactivate it, I had to create a new flow separately though. So it's, again, just housekeeping though. Right, before the demo, I have a few snippets here and there. So again, the things which we discussed now. So if you see here, I've for an account record, what I'm doing is I've created a custom field called isActive, and I'm actually setting the isActive field to false, and if the isActive field is in a particular value, go and set me a account number or whatever it is basically. So so here I'm trying to do the process before I get into the flow. So I could get into the flow. I'll get back here. So you can get into the flow, and also you could actually start adding the decision element inside the flow. So, but if you have a lot of processes, so how many of you have had more than 10 process builders or 10 workflows for a particular object? Okay, more than half of the room. Right. So flows are here to make that better. So I'm not here to say like use one flow per object. So that's again something that's not the way we are going to go with. But if you're going to have multiple flows, there are a lot of other tools which you're going to discuss in the session going forward to see how do you have multiple flows in a particular object though. But the key thing is start having your entry criteria here. So do not have the entry criteria inside the flow, because that makes a huge performance difference though. And also choose the right option here. So in case if you're checking with the previously changed value to the current value, so if from false it moves to true or whatever it is, if you're going to change and have if you're going to have a check based upon from false to true, and if it has to change from false to true, then go ahead when selecting this option though. Again, instead of going into the decision element and clicking through this decision and say record prior is active false, current record true. Record prior, if anybody who didn't know, it's about, there are a few elements inside the flow where you could pick the previous instance or previous values which you have for that record, and the current record is the record without the prior is the current values which the user has just updated now. So if you have an update scenario, you will have both old values and new values, where you could say if a particular field has changed, then only do this flow. Again, makes the performance so much more better. Right, again, so this is just to say what we would have done with the decision element, and yeah, so having something over here. If you're going to have only like 2 or 3 process builders, for example, or 2 or 3 workflows, but there's not much of processing to do, and you want to do the processing inside it, then yes, go ahead with a single flow in that option, and then have a decision element, work with the decision element where you could set, I think I'll be using a record prior and record over here as well though. So the other housekeeping thing, not many would change this outcome order, the default one. I think it's again a good habit to start using a value over there, because default doesn't mean anything. Yeah, so try and have some value. If somebody else, another admin or another person who's using the flow gets into that, default doesn't mean anything to them. So yeah, so as you see here, all I'm doing is checking the record current value. This is without the prior, and the one with the prior it's the previous value. So I'm just checking if the value has changed basically over here. Right, we'll get a little bit more deep into this in the demo on the record trigger flows. Yeah, so the next topic, as I mentioned, was asynchronous triggers. So this is when you, for sure, wouldn't expect the process to be completed then and there for the record to be functioning for an end user or for somebody who is using the Salesforce platform. So at that point, you go ahead with this asynchronous option. So sometimes certain processes, if it's 10, 15 seconds later, you don't care about it. I think it's only a fraction of a second, probably a 2 or 3 seconds later it'll run, though that's about it. It's not spontaneous. It doesn't do it with the commit of that record to the database, basically. So if you're creating an account, the account gets created. You'll have an account called Ashwin. Yeah, so if I name myself as an account, so you'll have an account get created, and if I'm sending an email out or if I'm creating a contact for that or whatever I'm doing in the asynchronous process, if it has an error or if it has a failure, it wouldn't care about it, yeah? Your account gets created. That's what it means. Basically, your database gets committed, your process is over, it'll be a lot more faster for the person who's seeing it, but there could be background processes which is running out of that commit though, which is not being tracked, which is not synchronous to that initial process where you have started with, yeah? So at that point, where you might want to have some sort of error logging mechanisms or at least to have switch on the notifications for the automation settings. I think I'll show that as well. So that somebody gets an email to start with, and a system admin or somebody who gets an email, there is a failure. But ideally, it's good to have some sort of an object called error log, and then just to log that error, whatever we are facing over there, because this error won't be coming out in the screen, or this error won't be synchronous to stop that record to be created. So that everything will look fine, everything will look good, but if you go and see, the contact might not be there. It just won't be there. So the only thing is because it's an asynchronous process and the errors happen in the asynchronous side of it. So that's why I've added this statement as well. Just ensure that if you're creating a flow with the asynchronous process, try and do the checkbox when you're creating it itself in the start. Right, okay, so I tried to, I don't know if it's a good fun though. I tried to add some pictures to make it little nicer, but yeah, I don't know if the appy looks like an Explorer though, but that's the closest I could get, where it's wearing a big specs and with the bag on and things. So I thought, okay, Explorer and then somebody in the parachute. So yeah, so we're going to look into flow trigger explorers now. So I'll take a pause here and rewind why we're going to use this flow trigger explorer. So we talked about a lot about this record triggers, create, update, asynchronous. So when an account get created, or any object when you get created, if you have a flow, you could have multiple things flying across. And a lot of admins would have had a lot of housekeeping to do if you have had like 40 process builders to be converted into flows. Should I create 40 process builders? I've had this question in the past, and thanks to the person who gave this clicker, he gave me the question as well, Lee Palmer. So yeah, thank you. So it's a very valid question, right? So it's because you've done it for a reason. You wouldn't have, I mean, some might be housekeeping elements where, yes, there might be two admins who have worked parallelly and who thought, like, let me create two process builders though. But there might be a reason why you wanted to keep the process builders separate. So yes, Flow has given us a way to make it neater, maintain it, and also have a good performance in it. Yeah, that's the Flow Trigger Explorer. Right. How many of you have used the screen? How many of you are aware of Flow Trigger Explorer? Wide audience, 70% at least. Yeah, thank you. That's great. Okay. So while we are here, I want to just touch base upon some of the namings. Yeah. So again, it's a convention where you want to follow, or your team want to follow, your company want to follow. You could build your own conventions. There's nothing which is right or wrong, but have a consistency. That's the thing. Yeah. So not to have one named as trigger A, trigger 2, test trigger. How many of you are at test trigger in production? Probably. I don't know. So yeah. So do not do that. Yeah. So yeah. I started following, or in our company we started following a pattern. We are slowly injecting into in projects and things. So to have an S object name to start with, what type of flow it is, and then what the flow itself is doing. So if the flow is doing multiple processes, have a summary of it in a very as best as you could give. Yeah. So if you see here, account before trigger, account after trigger, and then create a contact and create set account number, and then send email and so on though. Yeah. So the reason why we are naming, even if you have the Trigger Explorer, is there's a lot of people who still use the normal UI to go into the flow triggers, and that will have screen flows, platform flows or any other. If you have used field service, you'll have a lot of flows on field service as well. There's multiple templates which Salesforce provides to create UI-related flows. There's plenty, right? So you want to categorize into some good section where it's more readable. So try and see if that's possible, though. So yeah, Flow Trigger Explorer. So as many would have used, the best part with this is it gives a good overview of everything. It's more like, for the developers here, it's more like a helper class where you have an orchestration done where you say like, yes, this is my main class. Everything else goes from that class, and I call helper methods though. For the admins and the functionals here, this is more of one-stop shop place where you can have a good overview of whatever is happening on that particular object, and it's easy housekeeping from there as well. And also you could also start saying like what order each and every element is going to be functioning. So that's something which everybody would have controlled in code. You don't have to go to your developer and ask anymore though. So it's more of saying like, yes, I could say which process should happen before and which process should happen after. Sorry. Yes, obviously the fast field updates does before the save, as I said before, and then this happens after the save to the database, and then asynchronous happens post that though. But within that section, you could order elements where you could say this comes first and this comes next. They also have a good overview page where you can just, if you click through one of these drop downs over here, you could activate a flow, you could do order change over there as well. There's some minor elements if you want to change around the versioning or around deactivating, activating. You don't need to go into a flow for that. So you can just use that edit box and then do some operations over there as well. Right. So this is something pretty key. A lot of people, again, who have used Trigger Explorers do not do it in the right way, and there is reasons why we should follow that. So yes, as I mentioned, you could do reordering. You could do reordering by dragging and dropping elements. Yeah, just drag and drop whichever order you would want to have, or you can click the edit version, and then you will have this UI where you could say what order it comes with and what order it does. Like So I've given an order as 2. Do you all agree with order of 2 is okay? Like 1, 2 ordering is okay, or is there anything? Right, okay.
10-20 makes it easy to put things in between.
Exactly. I'll repeat the thing which lady, the friend who gave an answer for as well. So just for the recording purposes as well. So it's better to give 10, 20, or I mean, I've given 600, 1,200. Yeah, it's better to give a wider range. For one reason being, you might create flows later on. Yeah. So what happens is if you change the order, you have to deactivate everything. So if you have 1 and 2, you can't sneak in one element between that 1 and 2. You have to change everything. You have to deactivate a couple of elements. You have to change everything so that you can sneak in the 2 in between, and then the 1, 2, and 3 will happen though. But if you name it, yes, 600 and 1,200 probably a kill. If you're going to have 1,200 flow triggers, then there's something really wrong with the organization or the requirement. Yeah. So, but it's just to make it more obvious, we chose this number. Yeah. So this just use something like 100, 200, something more visible and more clear. How do you want to version it though? So if you see here, if I change it, so I just dragged the second element to the in the first order to execute, and obviously the first will go to the second. What happened is, since my first element was 600 and the second element was 1,200, my new order is now 300 and 600. Yeah, so it doesn't have to cause any change to that second the element which is 600. So it doesn't have to do any change to this flow. Don't have to deactivate or don't need to do any sort of ordering change there. The order remains as it is, but if anything comes before it or anything comes after it, if you have 5 flows which comes before it, you still have that bandwidth, you still have that number where you don't have to change that. It could still be active when you're deploying. Everything makes it more easier, and then handling it. Thank you very much for that. Yeah. So yeah, does everybody get this part? Yeah, cool. Okay. It's just a slide which I stated that in explanation. As I mentioned, the 10, 20, or 100, it's okay, but going in thousands probably it's a bit of overkill. But again, it's nothing bad to do 1,000 or 2,000. It's not, doesn't mean like you're going to have 1,000 records though. It just gives you a whole number where it makes it a lot more easier to read. That's about it. Flow performance is not going to change by giving the number into a 60 or a 600, yeah? Right, just before we go into demo, how many of you have used orchestration? There's one very minimal reason I bought this here. So it's just only a couple of people, yeah? There's only a minimal reason I've bought this here. It's nothing to do with the flow trigger or trigger process itself. But again, the orchestration is triggered by a record save. So it is still a flow which could be triggered by something changed in the database, yeah? So you could create a case where because of the case getting created, there is a change happened in the record, and then you open up an orchestration. So to the wider audience, an orchestration is nothing but a set of steps where you can have a UI step, you can have like a wizard-based step. If you say, when an account is created, go and get all the certifications underneath the account or a partner score or whatever it is. You might want to give a UI to the end user who is creating an account over the phone and say like, oh yeah, this is my next step. This is the step after, and if you have to do any background processing, so this contains two types of flows, yeah? So in orchestration, you could add a couple of flows. You could add a screen flow in orchestration, and also you could add an auto-launch flow, yeah? So this is how, on a simple note, this is how the orchestration will look like. There's nothing but, from a component-wise, a stage and a decision. Decision to say if a particular logic is true, go and do this particular stage. That's all it is, as simple as it is. Once you pick a stage, as I mentioned, the partner certification count, I don't know if the example is too relevant per se, just gave an example out, but yeah. So this is one stage, yeah? In that stage, you could have multiple steps, and each and every step has to be either a screen flow or an auto-launch flow. Basically, something which is happening in the background, where you want to count a value based upon the number of certifications got added to see what was the previous value, and put the number back in the account, maybe that processing in the background, yeah? Or just a screen flow where you want to give a UI to the end users where, yes, the end users might want to change something, add the certification number again, or create a contact per se. So it's a step-based process though. So you could have multiple steps. You could structure it exactly like any other flow, but it will be like a stage. So you say like the first stage is to partner certification count. The second stage could be creating a contact, as I said. Third stage could be escalating the partner if the certification is 0, probably. So, or yeah, things like that. You could have multiple stages, and you could group certain UI and certain background process in the stages. So there's nothing so the name was quite daunting, where it's like, oh yeah, it's going to do too many things, but there's nothing massive it's doing compared to Flow Trigger Explorer that has more use per se. But from an orchestration perspective, this is more like, you can have a nice wizard developed, and that UI will give you a nice overview. Rather than having subflows, you can have stages and you can have steps inside it. That's about it. Right, let's go and do some demo. Okay, I have to throw something which is Little Indian, so yeah. How many of you have seen this dance though before? Okay, 5, 6 people. Okay. It's not me dancing. Okay, so I'm going to show some of the flows which I have built for the demo here, and also we'll see in the UI how things are going to reflect per se. Yeah. So I'll first open the before trigger 1. So again, like there's nothing massive I'm doing here, so I've just kept the concept quite simple. So all I'm doing is checking if the account is active, yeah. Once the key thing, as I mentioned in the presentations, is on the slides, is to use when the flow to run correctly to see if it is a changed element rather than having checks inside the flow. So I've done all the checks outside the flow, and all I need to do is just this. It saves in the database. If you have 10 elements to set based upon a particular field or based upon a couple of fields, just keep adding those elements, so that's about it, right? So if an account is active and if it's a partner type account, if you want to set certain fields, easy. So all it needs is one step. It doesn't need any sort of, the key thing to notice is the before trigger. As I mentioned, it happens just before committing it to the database. So there's no need of any update to that record itself, or basically if you're doing it on the account, there's no need of a statement to say update this account again, because it will automatically will commit the values which you're setting here into that account though. The only important thing is try and ensure that we are using this current record item over here, yeah? And as I said, like the criteria could be multiple, so you could have an OR condition, AND condition, a custom condition, a formula created in the flow. There's a lot of things you could do, yeah? So yeah, just try and use as much as possible the entry criteria and structure your flow in the trigger flow explorer. So my after trigger flow, there's a couple of items I've created here. Right, again, one step flow, yeah? So you might like a lot of people would have had like spider flow or fancy huge diagrams where before this I don't know what they call this, the new auto layout setting came up. There's a lot of people who are designing flows like a diagramming thing though. So more like today morning session from my colleague Matt Moore is like huge diagram of flows. There's no need of that, yeah? So just keep it simple. Yes, obviously it might not be a single element over here. It might be a little bit more than the single element. Try and use the subflows, try and use actions. Try and use elements where you think that it could make it simple, or if you think that there's a lot more complex, or if you think that there's a lot of different complex scenarios or calculations you're handling, try and separate them into separate flows. So 2 separate flows, do 2 separate things, order it in the Trigger Explorer, go ahead with it. From a performance-wise, it'll be very good. So all I'm doing is just sending an email out, which we'll see in the demo. Yeah. Over here, another item here is this. As I said, like the account after trigger will happen after the account gets created. So that when it hits the database, I'm saying go and assign some contact fields. So if you're creating another record, yeah, important thing, yes, obviously, a lot of people do forget it first time. It's like, oh yeah, what's happened? I have often accounts, often contacts getting created. Just ensure that you tag it back to the source account from the record where it comes from though. So yeah, so it's a simple assignment and creating a contact. I know I've used Marcus Rashford here, so it just probably gives out what I'm going to do in the demo as well. So yeah, right, okay. Should we go ahead and create a contact account? Sorry. Right, so I've created a account called Capgemini. I know obviously Marcus Rashford doesn't work for us, yeah. So, but I've created an account called Capgemini where you've seen the new record being created, but I've not marked this is active element as true. Yeah, I've kept it as false. So if you've seen my before trigger, all I'm doing is setting the account number to 123 over here. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is just change the value from false to true. And all it should be doing is just setting this account number. Yes, I've hard-coded it here, but I think you guys understand the core concept here, right? You'll be doing a lot more processes or values set based upon any calculations you would want to do as well. So, yes, that should have hopefully triggered an email as well, but let me not open my inbox, which probably is going to crash. Okay, let me just force quit it for now. Yeah, yes, it would have sent me an email as well because I have a email trigger flow as well. So the next thing which we have here is the orchestration one. Yeah. So over here, all again I have is an interactive step. So if I go over here, you could see I've selected a flow. So this is nothing but a screen flow behind scenes. Yeah. So I've selected. So if I add an extra step, say I add a background step, all it will do is go and pick. All it will ask is go and pick a flow which you want to run. That's about it. Orchestration is nothing but a collection of things you would want to have for the wizard to work. It could be a background step. It could be a UI, mix of UI and background step. Ideally, because that's how I see it actually, at least. Yeah. So you could add a background step over here with an auto launch flow, or you could add a interactive step to say I'll pick any of the screen flows over here. Yeah. And the other thing is you can add another stage element, or with a stage element with a decision. So you could say if account is active, Okay, ignore it for now, but probably, yeah. But yeah, you could say account is active and then have an extra stage which you could have as like checking partner score or whatever it is, yeah. So for orchestrations, quickly gonna show that out. So all it is it's a screen which I have created called priority, and then I could set a priority, and I'm closing the priority over here, yeah? So that's about it. And you have a UI in orchestration called orchestration runs. So you could check like if the orchestration run has been completed fully or not over there, yeah? Let me quickly jump back to the slides. We did discuss about the scheduled trigger flow. You could set a time and then run based on the time. It's exactly the same as any other flow, but runs based on the time. Again, high-level overview of platform events. I don't think many of you have used platform events. It's more, again, to say, I listen to this message. If a message is thrown out, do, again, some more processes in a flow. That's about it. Right, so coming to the topic of one trigger, multiple trigger and things. So as I mentioned earlier, try and do, again, like process builders, having multiple processes, process builders are really bad. From a performance-wise, they are very, very bad. But from a flow perspective, they're not bad, yeah? Single or multiple, both will work in this quite similar way. But if you have multiple, you can structure it neatly. It's more readable, easy to work on, slightly better in the performance. If you have the entry criteria, even more better in the performance. So you try and use more of the flow trigger explorer, have multiple flows if you'd require to, and then build it according to the requirement or a particular logic, have a separate flow for each and every logic, and maintain them in the trigger explorer itself though. So some of the areas where I said like, before save, the fast trigger item, definitely go with the flow, unless you have complex calculations in the Apex which needs to be made. After, again, you could make a choice. If it's asynchronous, again, you could go with flow because nobody will know how bad is the performance or good is the performance. It'll be asynchronous, the end user won't see that, yeah? So you can go with the flow. But after any calculations, if you have complex calculations, think about mix of flow and Apex if it's possible, where a developer could write some generic logic where you could make use of it, or to go, if it's a very, very complex scenario where you have lots of maps involved, and for developers who have been using this, something where you need to make it more efficient, where you can't do it in a flow, obviously go with Apex. But there's a lot, 90% of it you can try and achieve with the flow itself these days though. So this is the figure I want to end with, basically. So if you see here, there's not much of difference to what we had with workflows and the process builders and the after flow trigger. This is from the Salesforce's architect guide. So why not flows now, yeah? So just admins and functionals just push the developers to ensure like we could start using flows as long as we follow some of the good best practices and ensure we follow fairly in a way where it's consistent. So documenting, naming, using Trigger Explorer, entry criteria. Unit test is something which is new in Salesforce flows. Venture into that as well. And then having some custom metadata to say like switch off and on flows in production if you'd want to, and also based upon the business you make a call. At the end of the day, if a business, if you think that this one flow is required, that's it, nothing more than that, and you're not going to cost anything in the performance wise, just go with one flow. That's about it. So it's basically a gut feeling and a choice. Yeah. Right, some references over here. Anybody if they need it. So it's the Well Architect slide and some of the items which I spoke about. I'll leave this reference out. I just want to take the questions and also want to show those to Cody Bear and the and the Ruth the elephant as well. But any questions? Thank you.
1 minute, Ashwin.
Yes. Any questions, guys? Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. That's great talk.
Yes.
How do permissions work with flows? So who can run them? Who can't run them?
So with screen flows, you can choose like if it has to run with system context or system context with sharing, system context without sharing, run as a user. But with the trigger, it's more of the trigger processing, right? It's a background process. So you don't need to worry too much into the details of the permissions itself though. But anything with the screen flow, definitely do take care of if it is a background process which has to run, where you think that a particular screen where you have to bypass the permission, you can say like run in a system context, without sharing though. There's I'll show it to you probably after the talk. There's few settings you can have on the with sharing and without sharing as well. Yeah. Thank you. Any questions?
Can you
Sorry, one second.
order for manage trigger?
Yeah. Can you change order for?
Manage flows, trigger order for manage.
Oof, good question. I think create your own trigger explorer. It's more of the explorer, right? The explorer doesn't go with, you don't have to worry about making explorer as a managed one. Go and use an explorer which probably has some managed components in it, and then change the explorer across. So it's not, that's why the naming of 600 and 1000 will help, because you don't have to deactivate the managed one, but you can just change it across though. So yeah, good question to be fair. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, all.
What we've seen is that there's market overload. People are buying really expensive technology, but they're really not making the most out of it.
We want to show people can strategize now to plan for the future and plan to kickstart those projects.